You know what's wild? We put people on the moon, we've cloned sheep, we've got AI writing poetry and cars that drive themselves. But we still can't find a 5 feet 5 inches Teamster who disappeared from a parking lot in 1975. Jimmy Hoffa vanished 50 years ago, and somehow this man has become America's most successful hide-and-seek champion. Like, my guy disappeared so thoroughly that people have been digging up football stadiums looking for him. Football stadiums. That's not a burial. That's performance art. So buckle up, because today we're diving into the disappearance that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories, more FBI digs in a construction company, and enough mob connections to make The Godfather look like a children's book. This is the story of how one labor union boss became America's most wanted corpse. Let's start with the basics, because if you're going to understand why everyone's been losing their minds over this case for half a century, you got to know who Jimmy Hoffa actually was. And spoiler alert, he wasn't just some random dude who liked trucks. James Riddle Hoffa. Yes, Riddle was his middle name, which is either the universe's greatest joke or the most on-the-nose foreshadowing in history, was born in 1913 in Brazil, Indiana. Not the Brazil with beaches and carnival. The Brazil with corn and more corn. His family was poor, like Depression-era poor, and when Jimmy's dad died when he was 7, things got even rougher. By age 14, this kid was dropping out of school to work full-time loading freight at a grocery warehouse in Detroit. And here's where our story really begins, because teenage Jimmy looked around at his working conditions. Terrible pay, insane hours, zero job security, and thought, yeah, nah, this ain't it. In 1932, at 19 years old, Hoffa organized his first strike. Picture this. He and his co-workers are loading strawberries, which are perishable, right? Time-sensitive. So they wait until half the strawberries are loaded. Then boom, work stoppage. The company can't afford to let the shipment rot, so they have to negotiate. Brilliant. Diabolical. This man understood leverage before he could legally drink. The strike worked. Hoffa got noticed by the Teamsters. That's the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the trucking union. And within a few years, this scrappy kid from Indiana was climbing the ranks faster than a caffeinated squirrel up a tree. By 1957, Jimmy Hoffa became the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which at the time was the largest labor union in America. We're talking 1.5 million members. This wasn't just a job, this was power. Real tangible. I can shut down entire cities with a phone call power. Because here's the thing about truckers. They move everything. Food, supplies, merchandise. You name it, it's on a truck. Control the truckers. Control the economy. Hoffa didn't just understand this. He weaponized it. Under his leadership, the Teamsters became an unstoppable force. He negotiated better wages, better benefits, better working conditions. To the average truck driver, Jimmy Hoffa was basically a superhero in a suit. To corporations, he was public enemy number 1. But here's where it gets spicy, because Jimmy didn't just play nice with unions. He also played very nice with organized crime. Now, I'm not saying Jimmy Hoffa was mobbed up. Actually, wait, yes I am. That's exactly what I'm saying. Because it's documented fact that Hoffa had extensive ties to organized crime families across the country. The Detroit Partnership, the Genovese family, the Bufalino crime family. Jimmy had connections with all of them. And before you judge him too harshly, let's be real. In the 1950s and 60s, if you wanted to run a major union, especially in industrial cities, you basically had to work with the mob. They controlled the labor, the enforcement, the intimidation. It was a package deal. The mob helped Hoffa maintain control of the Teamsters, dealt with problems. And by problems, I mean rival union leaders or uncooperative companies. And in return, Hoffa gave them access to something even better than cash, the Teamsters Pension Fund. This thing was a gold mine worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and under Hoffa's watch, it became the mob's personal ATM. They'd take out loans to build casinos in Las Vegas, because of course it was casinos in Vegas, and other ventures, often with suspiciously favorable terms and mysteriously disappearing repayment schedules. The FBI estimated that organized crime siphoned off hundreds of millions from the Teamsters Pension Fund. That's not a leak, that's a hemorrhage. But here's what made Hoffa so fascinating. He was simultaneously fighting for the working man and with the mob. Like, this dude would be negotiating a groundbreaking contract for truck drivers on Monday, then having dinner with Tony Provenzano, a Teamsters vice president and actual captain in the Genovese crime family. On Tuesday, he existed in this wild gray area where union activism met organized crime, and somehow he balanced it for years. Years. The man was a tightrope walker in a hurricane. Obviously, the federal government was not thrilled about any of this. Enter Robert F. Kennedy, stage left, with a briefcase full of subpoenas and a personal vendetta that would make Batman jealous. In the late 1950s, RFK was the chief counsel for the Senate committee investigating labor racketeering. His primary target? You guessed it, Jimmy Hoffa. And let me tell you, this wasn't just professional. This was personal. Kennedy and Hoffa hated each other with the intensity of 1,000 suns. They were like if Batman and the Joker had a workplace rivalry instead of fighting on rooftops. Between 1957 and 1964, Kennedy called Hoffa to testify before Senate committees multiple times. The exchanges were legendary. RFK would grill Hoffa about union corruption, mob ties, and financial irregularities. Hoffa would deflect, plead the fifth, or just straight up antagonize Kennedy with smug grins and smart-ass remarks. It was the world's most hostile episode of Meet the Press. At one point, Kennedy reportedly told his staff, "I have to get Hoffa. Not we should investigate. Or let's look into this." No, it was personal mission statement energy. When JFK became president in 1961 and appointed Bobby as Attorney General, Hoffa knew he was cooked. Because now Kennedy didn't just have a committee, he had the entire Department of Justice. They called it the Get Hoffa Squad, which is the least subtle task force name in history. Between 1961 and 1964, Hoffa was indicted multiple times. Jury tampering, fraud, conspiracy. They threw the whole legal bookshelf at him. Most of the cases didn't stick initially, but Kennedy was relentless. Obsessed, even. Then, in 1964, Hoffa was finally convicted of jury tampering and fraud related to misuse of the Teamsters pension fund. He was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. This was the moment Kennedy had been waiting for, the ultimate gotcha. But Hoffa didn't go quietly. He appealed, delayed, fought every step. It wasn't until 1967, 3 full years after his conviction and 4 years after JFK's assassination, that Jimmy Hoffa finally entered federal prison. But prison wasn't the end of Jimmy Hoffa's story. Not even close. Because what goes down must eventually come back up, especially if you've got friends in high places. By 1971, Hoffa had served less than 5 years of his 13-year sentence, and he was getting antsy. Prison life wasn't exactly his vibe. But here's the problem. He couldn't just walk out. He needed a pardon or a commutation from the President of the United States. And lucky for him, sitting in the Oval Office was Richard Nixon, a man who understood transactional politics better than anyone. The Teamsters had supported Nixon in the 1968 and 1972 elections, politically and financially. Frank Fitzsimmons, who'd taken over as Teamsters president while Hoffa was locked up, was cozy with the Nixon administration. So when Hoffa's people started floating the idea of a commutation, Nixon was open to it. On December 23, 1971, Richard Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence. Just like that, Jimmy was free. Merry Christmas, Jimmy. And this is a big but, there was a catch. The commutation came with a restriction. Hoffa was banned from participating in union activities until 1980. He couldn't hold office, couldn't organize, couldn't officially involve himself in Teamsters business for nearly a decade. For a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in union leadership, this was basically a gag order wrapped in a straitjacket. Nixon had freed Hoffa's body but caged his purpose. Hoffa was furious. He was convinced, probably correctly, that Fitzsimmons and the mob had lobbied for that restriction specifically to keep him from reclaiming power. See, while Hoffa was in prison, Fitzsimmons had gotten comfortable in the president's chair. The mob loved Fitzsimmons because he was more pliable, more cooperative, less likely to cause problems. Hoffa, for all his mob connections, was still a strong personality who did things his way. Fitzsimmons? He was a yes man. And the last thing the mob wanted was Hoffa coming back and rocking the boat. But Jimmy Hoffa didn't get where he was by following rules. The second he got out, he started plotting his return. He began challenging the commutation restriction in court, arguing it was unconstitutional. He started reconnecting with loyalists, rebuilding his network, positioning himself for a comeback. He was determined to reclaim his throne, and he didn't care who he had to push aside to do it, including his old friends in organized crime. And that decision, choosing ambition over allegiance, might have been what got him killed. Let's fast forward to July 30th, 1975. It's a Wednesday, hot summer day in Detroit. Jimmy Hoffa wakes up at his home in Lake Orion, Michigan, kisses his wife Josephine goodbye, and tells her he's heading out for a meeting. This meeting, he says, is with Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. Two Tonys, both mobsters. That should have been his first red flag, honestly. If you're meeting with two guys both named Tony, and they're both in the mob, maybe reconsider your afternoon plans. Provenzano was a Teamsters vice president and a capo regime in the Genovese crime family based in New Jersey. Hoffa and Tony Pro had serious beef. They'd gotten into a heated argument while both were in prison. Something about Hoffa refusing to help get Provenzano's pension restored. And allegedly, Tony Pro had threatened Hoffa's family. Not great foundation for a friendly lunch. Giacalone was a captain in the Detroit Partnership, the local Mafia family. He was supposedly acting as mediator between Hoffa and Provenzano, arranging this meeting to smooth things over. At least, that's what Hoffa thought. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, an upscale suburb of Detroit. It was a public place, busy, seemingly safe. Hoffa figured even if things got tense, nobody would try anything in broad daylight at a popular restaurant. Narrator voice, they absolutely would try something. Hoffa arrived early. Around 1:30 p.m. witnesses saw him in the parking lot, waiting. He was wearing a dark blue short-sleeved shirt and dark blue pants. Because apparently Jimmy Hoffa was committed to monochrome even on the day he'd vanish. He looked impatient, checking his watch, pacing. At 2:15 p.m., neither Tony had shown up. At 2:30 p.m., Hoffa called his wife from a payphone. "The bastard stood me up," he told her, annoyed but not alarmed. He said he'd wait a bit longer then head home. After that call, Jimmy Hoffa walked back toward the parking lot, and then he disappeared. Seriously, it's like he walked into an invisible portal. 1 second he's standing in a restaurant parking lot in suburban Detroit in the middle of the afternoon. The next, gone. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just absence. When Hoffa didn't come home that evening, Josephine called the police. His car, a 1974 Pontiac Granville, was still in the parking lot, unlocked. Inside, investigators found nothing unusual. No signs of foul play, no evidence of violence. It was like Jimmy had simply decided to stop existing. But we all know what happened. Well, we don't know because nobody's talking and there's no body, but we can make some pretty educated guesses based on witness testimony, FBI investigations, and the fact that Hoffa had recently pissed off approximately everyone in the Detroit mob. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Hoffa getting into a maroon Mercury Marquis in the parking lot around 2:45 p.m. The car had 3 men inside. Hoffa got in, whether willingly or forced is unclear, and the car drove away. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jimmy Hoffa alive. So who was in that car? Well, according to FBI investigations and later testimony from mob informants, the suspect include Charles Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son and trusted associate, Salvatore Sally Bugs Bergoglio, a mob enforcer and Provenzano's right-hand man, and Thomas Andretta, another Provenzano associate. O'Brien has always denied involvement, but witness testimony and forensic evidence, including cadaver dogs detecting human remains sent in a car he'd borrowed that day, suggest otherwise. As for Bergoglio, he was murdered in 1978, shotgun in the street before he could testify about Hoffa. Convenient timing, that. The working theory, based on decades of investigation and informant testimony, is that Hoffa was lured to the Red Fox under the pretense of a peace meeting. When he arrived, his friends were waiting. He got in the car, probably because he trusted O'Brien, and was driven to a nearby house. What happened next is speculation, but the consensus among investigators is that Hoffa was killed shortly after, likely strangled or shot, and his body was disposed of quickly and efficiently. We're talking mob efficiency here. No loose ends, no evidence, no body. And that's where our mystery really begins. Because while we're pretty sure Hoffa's dead, the man would be 112 years old now. So unless he found a fountain of youth in a Detroit parking lot, yeah, he's gone. We have no idea what they did with his body. Which brings us to the fun part. The absolutely wild theories about where Jimmy Hoffa ended up. This is probably the most famous theory, the one that captured public imagination so thoroughly that the FBI literally tore up parts of Giant Stadium looking for Hoffa. The theory goes like this. After Hoffa was killed, his body was transported to the Meadowlands in New Jersey, where Giant Stadium was under construction in 1975. Supposedly, the mob had connections to the construction company and arranged for Hoffa's body to be buried in one of the concrete end zones. It's dramatic, it's bold, and it's the kind of poetic irony that makes for great storytelling. Jimmy Hoffa, Union man, literally becoming part of a stadium built by Union labor. The theory gained traction from various sources, including claims by mob associates and investigators who insisted they had credible information. In 2003, the FBI took it seriously enough to use ground-penetrating radar on the stadium. They found nothing. No body, no evidence, just a very expensive wild goose chase. In 2010, Giant Stadium was demolished to make way for MetLife Stadium, and during the demolition, investigators again searched for any sign of Hoffa. Again, nothing. Either the theory was completely wrong, or whoever buried Hoffa picked a spot that wasn't where people thought it was. Personally, I'm skeptical. Burying a body at an active construction site seems risky. Too many workers, too many witnesses, too many chances for someone to see something. But hey, it makes for a great headline. Jimmy Hoffa, the man beneath the end zone. This theory is darker and, frankly, way more plausible. According to this version of events, after Hoffa was killed, his body was taken to a mob-connected trash incinerator or meat processing plant in Detroit and completely destroyed. Burned to ash, ground up, scattered, basically erased from physical existence. It's grim, it's efficient, and it's exactly the kind of thing the mob would do if they wanted to make absolutely sure no one ever found evidence. In 2004, the FBI received a tip that led them to investigate a Detroit furnace company. They dug up the floor, tested soil samples, brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs indicated potential human remains, but DNA testing came back inconclusive. Nothing definitively linked to Hoffa. The theory remains unproven but highly credible. If you wanted to permanently dispose of a body in 1975, incineration was your best bet. No body, no crime, no closure. Some investigators believe Hoffa's body was weighted down and dumped in one of the Great Lakes, probably Lake Michigan or Lake St. Clair. Water disposal is classic mob methodology. It's clean, it's relatively easy, and bodies in deep water can stay hidden forever. The theory is that after Hoffa was killed, his body was driven to the waterfront, weighted with chains or concrete, and pushed overboard. The Great Lakes are massive, and Lake Michigan alone is over 300 miles long and nearly 1,000 feet deep in places. Finding a single body? Basically impossible. The problem with this theory is the same problem with all the theories. No evidence. No witnesses have come forward with credible information about a water disposal, and dragging the Great Lakes for a 50-year-old corpse isn't exactly feasible. But it's plausible enough that investigators haven't ruled it out. In 2006, the FBI got a tip that Hoffa's body was buried on a horse farm in Milford, Michigan, about 30 miles from where he disappeared. The farm was owned by a mobbed-up businessman who reportedly had connections to the Detroit Partnership. Investigators brought in ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a whole excavation team. They dug up large sections of the property, tested soil samples, and searched for weeks. They found old farming equipment, some trash, and absolutely zero Jimmy Hoffa. But this theory persists because the source, a mob enforcer turned informant, insisted the information was legitimate. He claimed he'd helped bury Hoffa there himself. Of course, by the time he gave this information, he'd been in witness protection for years, and his memory might have been a bit creative. Still, it was credible enough for the FBI to dedicate serious resources to the search. In 2021, yes, 2021, nearly 50 years after Hoffa vanished, the FBI got yet another tip. This one claimed Hoffa's body was buried in a New Jersey landfill, specifically the PJP landfill in Jersey City. The source was a former mob associate who said he'd been told by high-ranking mobsters that Hoffa was killed in Detroit, transported to New Jersey, and buried under tons of garbage. It's appropriately disrespectful. I'll give them that. The FBI considered the tip credible enough to investigate, but by 2021, the landfill had been closed for decades and was covered by new development. Excavating it would require tearing up buildings and removing God knows how many tons of earth and garbage. As of now, no dig has happened, mostly because it would be insanely expensive and disruptive for what might be another dead end. Still, this theory has legs because it aligns with mob practices. They've disposed of bodies in landfills before, and because New Jersey was absolutely crawling with mob activity in the 1970s. If you wanted to hide a body permanently, a landfill wasn't the worst choice. Okay, let me hit you with something really out there, because at this point, we've been searching for Jimmy Hoffa for 5 decades and found absolutely nothing. So why not get weird with it? Over the years, multiple tips have led investigators to suburban homes, claiming Hoffa was buried in someone's backyard. In 2012, police dug up a driveway in Roseville, Michigan after a tipster claimed Hoffa was buried beneath it. They jackhammered the concrete, excavated the ground underneath, tested everything. Nothing. In 2013, they tore up a floor in a Detroit home after another tip. Again, nothing. It's become almost a macabre tradition at this point. Someone claims they know where Hoffa is buried. The FBI shows up with shovels, the neighborhood gathers to watch, and nope, no Hoffa. Just a lot of disrupted landscaping and disappointed true crime fans. The backyard theories persist because they're plausible. A quiet, private property would be an ideal place to quickly bury a body. But the problem is there are millions of properties in Michigan. Without specific, credible information, it's like playing the world's most morbid game of Battleship. Yeah, you heard that right. Some investigators and mob informants have suggested that after Hoffa was killed, his body wasn't just disposed of, it was processed, ground up in a meat grinder or industrial equipment, then either mixed with cement, turned into fertilizer, or dumped as fish food. It's horrifying, it's disgustingly efficient, and it's exactly the kind of thing that would ensure absolutely no trace of him ever turned up. There's actually some precedent for this in mob history. Crime families have used meat processing plants, industrial grinders, and other equipment to dispose of bodies before. It's thorough, it's final. It leaves zero forensic evidence. No bones, no DNA, no nothing. Just gone. Erased from existence more completely than your browser history after a questionable 3 a.m. shopping spree. A former mob associate claimed in an interview that Hoffa's body was run through a meat grinder at a mob-connected facility in Detroit. Then the remains were scattered in multiple locations. Can't prove it, can't disprove it, and honestly, it's so dark that it almost makes sense. If you're the mob and you've just killed arguably the most famous union leader in America, you're not taking chances. You're not burying him somewhere he could be found. You're erasing every molecule. But here's what really keeps me up at night about this theory. If it's true, it means we'll never find Hoffa. Not in 100 years. Not with the most advanced technology. He's just gone. Scattered to winds, or the fishes. It's the perfect crime and the perfect middle finger to everyone who's been searching for him. This one's a personal favorite because of how casually brutal it is. The theory suggests that Hoffa's body was stuffed into a 55-gallon oil drum filled with concrete and either buried or sunk somewhere. Multiple mob informants over the years have claimed this is what happened, though they disagree on where the drum ended up. Some say it was buried on property owned by mob associates. Others say it was dropped in the Detroit River or Lake St. Clair. One particularly creative theory suggests it was buried on a construction site and is now literally part of a building foundation somewhere in Detroit. The drum theory makes logistical sense. It's portable, it's sealable, and once it's filled with concrete, It's basically a permanent tomb. No decomposition smell, no evidence leaking out. And if you sink it in water, it's weighted perfectly to stay at the bottom forever. In 2013, authorities actually searched a property in Oakland Township, Michigan, specifically looking for a steel drum after receiving a credible tip. They used ground-penetrating radar, brought in excavation equipment, and searched for weeks. Did they find a drum? Nope. Did they find Jimmy Hoffa? Also nope. Did they find their patience and will to live? Definitely nope. But the theory persists because it's so practical. If you were a mobster in 1975 and needed to hide a body permanently, a concrete-filled drum would be method number one with a bullet. It's the Tupperware of body disposal. Seals in freshness, keeps out prying eyes, and lasts forever. Multiple sources over the years have claimed that Hoffa's body was buried at a construction site and is now literally entombed underneath a building, road, or structure in the Detroit area. The most specific version of this theory points to the Renaissance Center, Detroit's iconic skyscraper complex that was under construction in the mid-1970s. The theory goes that Hoffa was buried somewhere in the foundation during construction, sealed in concrete, and has been there ever since, right in downtown Detroit, in one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. It's poetic, right? Jimmy Hoffa, the man who helped build Detroit's labor movement, literally becoming part of Detroit's skyline. The Renaissance Center theory gained enough traction that investigators seriously considered it. But here's the problem. You can't exactly tear down a major commercial complex on a hunch. The cost would be astronomical, the disruption massive, and the likelihood of finding anything minimal. Other versions of this theory point to various roads, overpasses, and buildings constructed in the Detroit area between 1975 and 1976. Basically, if concrete was poured in metropolitan Detroit during that time frame, someone's claimed Hoffa's buried in it. It's Detroit's version of there's a body in the walls, urban legends, except this one might actually be true. The frustrating thing about this theory is that it's almost impossible to disprove. You can't excavate every structure built in Detroit in the 1970s. And if Hoffa really is sealed in foundation somewhere, he's going to stay there until that building comes down naturally, which will be decades or centuries from now. Future archaeologists are going to have a field day with this one. All right, let's wrap up our tour of horrible disposal methods with this gem. Some investigators believe Hoffa's body was put through a car compactor. You know, those industrial machines that crush vehicles into little metal cubes? Yeah, those. The theory is that Hoffa's body was placed inside a car, possibly even his own car, and the whole thing was compacted and either sold as scrap metal or buried. This theory emerged from informant testimony in the 1980s. A mob associate claimed he'd heard that Hoffa's body had been crushed with a car, and the compacted cube was either melted down at a scrapyard or buried on mob control property. It's efficient, it's horrifying, and would explain why literally no trace of Hoffa has ever been found. If he's part of a car that was melted down and turned into rebar or kitchen appliances, well, he could be anywhere. He could be in your house right now, supporting your kitchen countertop. Sweet dreams. The FBI has investigated several mob-connected scrapyards over the years, looking for evidence of this theory, but they've never found anything conclusive. The problem is that in 1975, record-keeping at scrapyards wasn't exactly meticulous. Cars came in, cars got crushed, metal got melted down and sold. Nobody was keeping detailed logs. So even if this theory is true, proving it is virtually impossible. But here's what's genuinely disturbing about this theory. It's actually one of the most practical disposal methods. A car compactor would destroy dental records, fingerprints, DNA, everything. And the mob absolutely had access to these facilities. Multiple crime families controlled scrapyards specifically for this purpose. It's like the Industrial Revolution of murder cleanup. So, who actually killed Jimmy Hoffa? Let's talk suspects. We've covered where the body might be, but we haven't fully addressed the elephant in the room. Who actually did this? Who pulled the trigger, swung the weapon, or strangled the life out of one of the most powerful men in America? Well, buckle up, because we've got a whole roster of suspects. And spoiler alert, most of them are dead, which is super convenient for them and super frustrating for investigators. Suspect number 1, Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano. Let's start with the obvious candidate, Tony Pro. This guy had motive written all over him in neon letters. As mentioned earlier, Hoffa and Provenzano had serious bad blood. They'd been in prison together in the late 1960s, and according to witnesses, they got into a heated argument about Provenzano's pension. Hoffa, who was still pulling strings even from prison, refused to help restore Tony Pro's pension benefits. Tony Pro reportedly threatened Hoffa's family in response. Not, "I'm annoyed with you" threats, like, "I will harm your grandchildren" level threats. When Hoffa got out in 1971 and started making noise about reclaiming the Teamsters presidency, Tony Pro saw this as a problem. See, Provenzano was tight with Frank Fitzsimmons, the current Teamsters president. Fitzsimmons was cooperative, predictable, and importantly, not Jimmy Hoffa, the mob like Fitzsimmons. They did not want Hoffa back in power, rocking the boat and potentially exposing their operations. Tony Pro had every reason to want Hoffa gone. The FBI has long believed that Provenzano ordered the hit, even if he didn't personally carry it out. He had the motive, the means, and the connections. Plus, the supposed meeting at the Red Fox was allegedly arranged to smooth things over between Hoffa and Provenzano, except Tony Pro never showed up. Instead, Hoffa got picked up by unknown men and vanished. Coincidence? The FBI thinks not. Tony Pro was questioned extensively about Hoffa's disappearance, but never charged. He had an alibi. He was supposedly in New Jersey at the time, playing cards with associates. Of course, those associates were also mobsters who would lie for him, so that alibi is about as solid as cotton candy in a rainstorm. Provenzano died in prison in 1988, serving time for other crimes, and he took whatever he knew about Hoffa to the grave. Suspect number 2, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. Tony Jack was the other Tony supposedly involved in the Red Fox meeting. He was a high-ranking member of the Detroit Partnership and had known Hoffa for years. Unlike Tony Pro, Giacalone and Hoffa didn't have obvious personal beef, which is exactly why he was a perfect intermediary. Hoffa trusted him, or at least trusted him enough to show up to a meeting where Giacalone was supposedly playing peacemaker. But here's the thing. The FBI believed Giacalone was in on the setup from the beginning. He was the lure, the friendly face that got Hoffa to the Red Fox. Once Hoffa was there, the plan could proceed. Giacalone allegedly helped coordinate the logistics, who would pick up Hoffa, where they'd take him, how the disposal would happen. He was a Detroit connection, and in mob operations, local knowledge is everything. Like Provenzano, Giacalone was never charged. He denied any involvement, said he had nothing to do with it, claimed he barely knew Hoffa, which is a lie, by the way, because there's documented evidence of them meeting multiple times over the years. But without a body, without witnesses willing to testify, the FBI couldn't build a case. Tony Jack died in 2001, also taking his secrets to the grave. Seeing a pattern here? Everyone involved is conveniently dead. It's almost like they planned it that way. Suspect number 3, Salvatore Sally Bugs Bergoglio. Now we're getting into the guys who probably got their hands dirty. Sally Bugs was a mob enforcer, a stone-cold killer who worked directly for Tony Provenzano. Witnesses reported seeing a man matching Bergoglio's description in the Detroit area around the time of Hoffa's disappearance, despite him supposedly being in New Jersey. Multiple informants have fingered Sally Bugs as one of the actual triggermen, the guy who either killed Hoffa directly or helped dispose of the body. Here's where it gets juicy. In 1978, just as authorities were closing in and considering bringing Bergoglio in for serious questioning about the Hoffa case, he was murdered, shotgunned in the street in Little Italy, Manhattan. Professional hit, clean execution, no witnesses came forward. Bergoglio wasn't talk, or at least the mob thought he might talk, so they eliminated the problem. His murder basically confirmed his involvement in Hoffa's disappearance. You don't get whacked for something you didn't do. The FBI believes Bergoglio was in that maroon Mercury, possibly in the back seat, waiting for Hoffa. When Hoffa got in the car, probably through O'Brien's convincing, Sally Bugs was there to make sure things went according to plan. Whether he was the one who physically killed Hoffa or just helped is unclear, but his involvement seems almost certain. Suspect number 4, Charles Chucky O'Brien, the Judas Angle. This one hurts because Chucky O'Brien wasn't just some mob associate. He was Hoffa's foster son. Hoffa had raised him, mentored him, brought him into the Teamsters, treated him like family, and according to the FBI's theory, Chucky betrayed him in the worst way possible. O'Brien was seen in the Detroit area on the day Hoffa disappeared, and witnesses placed him driving a maroon Mercury Marquis, the same type of car Hoffa was reportedly seen getting into. Even more damning, O'Brien had borrowed that car from Tony Giacaloni's son. When the FBI found and tested that vehicle, cadaver dogs alerted to the scent of human remains in the back seat. O'Brien's explanation? He'd been transporting a fish earlier that day. A fish. The FBI was like, "Sir, our dogs are trained specifically to detect human remains, not salmon." But O'Brien stuck to his story. The theory is that Hoffa trusted O'Brien completely. If Chucky pulled up and said, "Hey, Jimmy, hop in, there's a change of plans," Hoffa would have done it without question. He wouldn't have suspected a trap from his own foster son. That trust made O'Brien the perfect Judas. Get Hoffa in the car, drive him to the kill site, and the rest is history. O'Brien denied involvement until his death in 2020, maintaining he had nothing to do with Hoffa's disappearance. But his own stepson, Hoffa's biological son, James P. Hoffa, believed Chucky was involved. That's how damning the evidence was. Your own family thinking you did it? That's rough. Suspect number 5, Frank the Irishman Sheeran, the Netflix theory. Okay, we need to talk about Frank Sheeran, because he's become the name associated with Hoffa's murder, thanks to Martin Scorsese's 2019 film The Irishman. In the movie, based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses, Sheeran, played by Robert De Niro, confesses to killing Hoffa. According to Sheeran's deathbed confession to author Charles Brandt, he was a triggerman. He claims he shot Hoffa twice in the back of the head inside a Detroit house, and the body was then cremated. Sheeran was a Teamsters official, a mob enforcer, and had connections to both Hoffa and the Pennsylvania mob boss Russell Bufalino. He was absolutely capable of the murder. The man was a hitman with multiple killings under his belt, and his confession is detailed, specific, and includes information that wasn't public knowledge. But here's the problem. A lot of investigators don't buy it. The FBI has said Sheeran's confession doesn't align with their evidence. His timeline doesn't match witness reports. He claimed Hoffa was killed in a specific house in Detroit, but searches of that property found no forensic evidence. Plus, Sheeran had a history of exaggerating his mob credentials and involvement in various crimes. Some investigators think he confessed to the Hoffa hit for notoriety, to go down in history as the man who killed Jimmy Hoffa, even if he didn't actually do it. Personally, I think Sheeran was involved somehow, maybe as a backup, maybe as a lookout, maybe as part of the cleanup crew. But was he the shooter? The evidence is shaky. It makes for a great movie, though. De Niro's de-aged face aside. But here's the real question. Why was Hoffa killed? We've talked about who might have done it, but let's dig into the why, because understanding the motive is crucial to understanding why this case has never been solved. Motive number 1. He was a threat to mob operations. After Hoffa got out of prison in 1971, he immediately started trying to regain control of the Teamsters. But the mob didn't want him back. Under Fitzsimmons, they had a sweet deal. Easy access to the pension fund, minimal interference, a cooperative leader who didn't ask questions. Hoffa was different. Yes, he'd worked with the mob for years, but he was unpredictable. He had his own agenda. He couldn't be controlled as easily as Fitzsimmons. Worse, Hoffa was challenging the commutation restriction in court. If he succeeded, he'd be free to run for Teamsters president again in 1976. The mob saw this as an existential threat. Hoffa back in power could mean investigations, audits, potential exposure of their operations. They couldn't risk it, so they eliminated the problem permanently. Motive number 2, he knew too much. Jimmy Hoffa had decades of dirt on the mob. He knew names, operations, financial schemes, murder plots, everything. As long as he was alive and potentially facing legal pressure, he was a liability. What if the feds offered him a deal? What if he decided to flip to save himself or his family? The mob couldn't take that chance. By 1975, Hoffa had been in the game for over 40 years. He'd seen and done things that could bring down entire crime families. His knowledge was dangerous, and dangerous people don't live long when they're no longer useful. The mob's policy has always been simple. Better to eliminate a potential rat before they have a chance to squeal. Motive number 3, personal vendettas. We can't discount the personal element. Tony Provenzano genuinely hated Hoffa after their prison conflict. The pension issue, the disrespect, the threats, it was personal. And in the mob, personal grudges often become professional decisions. If Tony Pro wanted Hoffa dead and could justify it to bosses as a business necessity, he'd absolutely pull the trigger. Same with other Teamsters officials who'd risen to power in Hoffa's absence. They didn't want him back, disrupting their comfortable positions. Sometimes the simplest motive is the realest. People wanted him gone because he was in their way. So, why hasn't this case been solved? Let's break down the problems. We've had 50 years, countless investigations, millions of dollars spent, multiple FBI task forces, and we're still no closer to finding Jimmy Hoffa than we were in 1975. Why? What makes this case so uniquely unsolvable? Problem 1. The mob knows how to keep secrets. Organized crime has survived for over a century specifically because they're good at one thing: keeping their mouths shut. Omerta, the code of silence, is real. Mob members don't talk to authorities, don't testify, don't cooperate. Even when they're facing life in prison, many stay silent out of fear for their families or respect for the code. The people who know what happened to Hoffa are either dead or staying silent. And without witness testimony, there's no case. Problem 2. No body, no crime. This is Forensics 101. Without a body, it's incredibly difficult to prosecute murder. You need physical evidence, remains, DNA, forensic proof that a death occurred and was caused by specific individuals. The mob knew this in 1975, which is why they were so thorough in disposing of Hoffa. They didn't just kill him, they erased him. And 50 years later, that decision has protected them completely. Problem 3. Time has destroyed evidence. Even if there was evidence at one point, blood, fibers, traces of Hoffa's presence, 50 years of time, weather, development, and environmental factors have destroyed it. Properties have been sold, demolished, rebuilt. Roads have been repaved. Waterways have been dredged. Any physical evidence that might have existed in 1975 is long gone by now. Problem 4. Informants are unreliable. Over the years, dozens of mob informants have claimed to know what happened to Hoffa. They've sent investigators on wild goose chases across multiple states, leading to excavations, searches, and investigations that went nowhere. Some informants were lying for reduced sentences. Some genuinely believed they had good information, but were actually repeating second-hand rumors. Some were just seeking attention. The FBI has wasted incredible resources chasing bad tips, and it's made them understandably skeptical of new leads. Problem 5. Everyone involved is dead. Tony Provenzano? Dead. Tony Giacalone? Dead. Sally Buggs? Dead. Frank Sheeran? Dead. Chucky O'Brien? Dead. Russell Buffalino? Dead. Basically, everyone who was directly involved in planning or executing Hoffa's murder has died of natural causes or been killed themselves. You can't prosecute corpses, and you can't get testimony from dead men. The passage of time has been the mob's greatest protector. But wait, there's actually some new developments in this case. Even though the case is 50 years old, investigators still haven't given up. And in recent years, there have been some interesting developments that might eventually crack this thing open. Development 1. Advances in forensic technology. Modern forensic science is light years ahead of what existed in 1975. Ground-penetrating radar is more sophisticated. Cadaver dogs are better trained. DNA analysis can extract information from microscopic samples. If investigators can identify a credible location and get permission to search, they have tools that might find evidence that would have been impossible to detect decades ago. In 2021, the FBI used advanced ground-penetrating radar technology to search the PJP landfill in New Jersey. While they didn't excavate, the scanning technology allowed them to create detailed subsurface maps that could guide future searches if funding and permission align. Development 2. The mob is weaker now. Organized crime in America isn't what it used to be. The major families have been decimated by RICO prosecutions, informants, and internal conflicts. Former mobsters are more willing to cooperate with authorities now, especially aging members who face long prison sentences, and see cooperation as their only way out. There's hope that someone, somewhere, might finally break the code of silence and provide credible information about what happened to Hoffa. In 2020, a former mob associate gave testimony suggesting Hoffa's body was buried in a specific location in New Jersey. The FBI considered the information credible enough to investigate, which shows they're still actively working leads even after all this time. Development 3. The persistence of Hoffa's family. Hoffa's children, particularly his son James P. Hoffa, who became Teamsters president himself from 1999 to 2022, have never stopped pushing for answers. They've kept pressure on law enforcement, advocated for a continued investigation, and kept the case in the public eye. That sustained attention has prevented the case from being quietly shelved, which is what happens to many cold cases. The cultural impact. How Hoffa became a legend. Let's talk about something fascinating. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance has transcended true crime and become part of American mythology. The phrase "buried like Jimmy Hoffa" has entered the cultural lexicon. He's been referenced in hundreds of TV shows, movies, songs, and books. Why? What is it about this case that has captured public imagination for 50 years? Reason 1. It's a genuine mystery. In an age where we can track anyone's movements via cell phone data, where security cameras are everywhere, where DNA analysis can solve crimes from decades ago, Hoffa remains lost. There's something almost romantic about a mystery that cannot be solved, a question without an answer. It appeals to our love of the unknown, the unsolvable puzzle. Reason 2. IT involved the mob. Americans are obsessed with organized crime stories. The Godfather, Goodfellas, The Sopranos, these aren't just movies and shows, they're cultural touchstones. Hoffa's story has all the elements of a great mob narrative: loyalty, betrayal, violence, power, and mystery. It's a real-life gangster story that's better than fiction because it actually happened. Reason 3. Hoffa was complex. He wasn't a simple hero or villain. He fought for workers' rights while enabling mob corruption. He improved lives while destroying others. He was simultaneously a champion of the working class and a criminal conspirator. That complexity makes him endlessly fascinating. We can't dismiss him as purely evil or celebrate him as purely good, so we're forced to grapple with the messy reality of who he was. Reason 4, it's darkly funny. There's something absurdly comedic about the fact that we've been digging up random properties across Michigan for 50 years looking for one dead mobster. The giant stadium theory, the horse farm, the endless backyards, it's become almost cartoonish. Saturday Night Live has parroted the search for Hoffa multiple times. It's serious, but it's also ridiculous, and that combination of tragedy and absurdity is very, very human. The Hoffa effect, how one disappearance changed everything. Here's something people don't talk about enough. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance fundamentally changed how law enforcement investigates organized crime. Before Hoffa, the FBI's approach to mob cases was reactive. Wait for a crime to happen, investigate, prosecute. After Hoffa, they went proactive. The failure to solve his disappearance became a masterclass in what not to do, and it revolutionized federal investigation tactics. The FBI realized they couldn't wait for bodies to turn up or witnesses to come forward. They needed informants inside the organizations. They needed wiretaps. They needed long-term surveillance operations. The frustration of the Hoffa case directly contributed to the aggressive RICO prosecutions of the 1980s and 90s that eventually broke the back of traditional organized crime in America. In a weird way, Hoffa's unsolved murder helped destroy the very organization that killed him. That's some poetic justice right there. The case also changed how authorities handle missing persons investigations involving suspected foul play. The golden hours concept, the crucial first 24 to 48 hours after someone disappears, became standard protocol largely because of lessons learned from Hoffa's case. By the time authorities realized Hoffa wasn't just missing but likely murdered, crucial evidence had already been destroyed or contaminated. The conspiracy theories. Because of course there are conspiracy theories. All right, we've covered the mainstream theories about what happened to Hoffa, but we haven't touched on the really out there stuff. And trust me, 50 years of unsolved mystery has produced some absolutely wild speculation. Let's dive into conspiracy theory deep end, shall we? Conspiracy Theory 1. The CIA did it. Some theorists believe Hoffa's disappearance was orchestrated by the CIA, not the mob. The logic goes like this. Hoffa had connections to various international criminal organizations that the CIA was monitoring during the Cold War. The Teamsters pension fund had been used to finance operations in Cuba, Las Vegas, and other locations of interest to intelligence agencies. According to this theory, Hoffa knew too much about CIA operations or was threatening to expose government involvement in organized crime. So he was eliminated. Is there any evidence for this? Not really. But the CIA has done stranger things, MKUltra anyone? So people can't completely dismiss it. Plus, there's a Kennedy connection. Both JFK and RFK were assassinated, and Hoffa had beef with both of them. Some conspiracy theorists have tried to link all three cases into one grand conspiracy involving the CIA, the mob, and various government agencies. It's a conspiracy theory equivalent of a crossover episode. Conspiracy Theory 2. Hoffa faked his own death. This one is simultaneously the most ridiculous and most entertaining theory. Some people genuinely believe Hoffa staged his own disappearance to escape mob pressure and federal prosecution. According to this theory, Hoffa got plastic surgery, assumed a new identity, and lived out his days in some tropical paradise, sipping margaritas and laughing at everyone digging up New Jersey. The problems with this theory are numerous. First, Hoffa would have had to abandon his family, which by all accounts he loved deeply. Second, he'd have to maintain perfect secrecy for 50 years, never slipping up, never contacting anyone from his old life. Third, the man was 62 years old in 1975 and had a very distinctive appearance and personality. He wasn't exactly built for anonymity. And fourth, why would he fake his death right when he was fighting to get his power back? It makes no sense. But people love the idea that Hoffa is still out there somewhere, age 112, reading news articles about searches for his body and chuckling to himself. It's like the mob version of the Elvis is alive conspiracy. Conspiracy Theory 3. The government helped dispose of the body. This theory suggests that corrupt government officials, possibly FBI agents or local police on the mob payroll, helped dispose of Hoffa's body. The idea is that the mob couldn't have hidden him this effectively without some inside help from people with access to resources and knowledge of investigation procedures. There's actually a tiny bit of plausibility here. We know that some law enforcement officials in the 1970s were corrupt and had connections to organized crime. We know the mob paid off cops, judges, and officials. Is it possible someone helped them dispose of Hoffa or cover their tracks? Maybe. But again, there's no concrete evidence, and most investigators believe the mob was perfectly capable of hiding the body without government assistance. Conspiracy Theory 4. Hoffa's body is in plain sight. This is a fun one. Some people theorize that Hoffa's remains aren't hidden at all. They're in a public cemetery, buried under a fake name or alongside someone else. The logic is that the best place to hide something is in plain sight. Nobody would think to search cemeteries for Hoffa, because why would the mob give him a proper burial? But that's exactly the point. It's so unexpected that it might have worked. Bury Hoffa in a casket with someone else's name, or slip his remains into an existing grave during a funeral, and he'd be hidden forever in the last place anyone would look. It's clever, it's bold, and it's completely unprovable unless someone decides to start exhuming random graves from 1975, which isn't happening. The media circus. How Hoffa became entertainment. Let's talk about how Hoffa's disappearance has been portrayed in media over the decades, because the case has inspired an insane amount of creative content. We got movies, TV shows, documentaries, books, podcasts, even a video game. Hoffa has become a character, a mythology, almost separate from the real person. The movies. Blood Feud, 1983, a TV movie starring Robert Blake as Hoffa, focusing on his rivalry with Robert Kennedy. Hoffa, 1992, directed by Danny DeVito, starring Jack Nicholson as Hoffa, a fictionalized but powerful portrayal of his life and career. The Irishman, 2019, Martin Scorsese's epic starring Robert De Niro as Frank Sheeran and Al Pacino as Hoffa, based on the controversial deathbed confession. It presents one version of what might have happened. Each of these films takes liberties with the truth, because that's what Hollywood does. But they've also kept Hoffa's story alive for new generations. Kids who weren't even born when Hoffa disappeared have now watched Al Pacino play him in a 3.5-hour Netflix epic. That's cultural staying power. The documentaries. There have been dozens of documentaries about Hoffa. The true story of the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, Riddle, The Search for James R. Hoffa, Who Killed Jimmy Hoffa? The list goes on. Every time there's a new search or a new theory, someone makes a documentary about it. It's become a true crime subgenre unto itself. The podcasts. In the podcast era, Hoffa's case has been dissected by everyone from professional journalists to amateur sleuths. Hoffa, Murder in Motor City, Mythical Monsters, Corbett, Ditch the Suits. Countless shows have dedicated episodes or entire seasons to the case. Podcasts have allowed for deeper dives into specific theories and witness testimonies than traditional media ever could. The psychological angle. Why can't we let this go? Here's a serious question. Why are we still obsessed with finding Jimmy Hoffa? Why does this case, specifically, maintain such a grip on the public imagination? There are thousands of unsolved murders in America, many more recent, many with victims who were arguably more sympathetic. So what is it about Hoffa? Reason 1. Closure is human nature. Humans are wired to want endings. We need stories to have conclusions. The fact that Hoffa's story has no ending, no body, no conviction, no resolution, creates a psychological itch we can't scratch. It's the same reason people can't stop thinking about unsolved mysteries or cliffhanger endings. Our brains literally need closure, and Hoffa's case denies us that. Reason 2. IT represents the limits of justice. Hoffa's disappearance is a reminder that sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes crimes go unpunished. Sometimes justice fails. That's deeply uncomfortable for society that wants to believe in fairness and accountability. We keep searching for Hoffa because finding him would prove that justice is still possible even after 50 years. It would show that crimes can't stay hidden forever. We need that to be true. Reason 3. It's about power. Hoffa was powerful. He controlled one of the largest unions in America, rubbed elbows with presidents and mobsters, bent entire industries to his will. And then he was just erased, gone, like he never mattered at all. There's something terrifying about that. If someone that powerful can disappear without a trace, what does that say about the rest of us? It's existentially unsettling, and we can't look away. Reason 4. We love a good mystery. Let's be honest, it's entertaining. The theories, the searches, the speculation. It's fun in a dark, morbid way. It's a real-life detective story that we're all invited to solve. Everyone can have their own theory about what happened, and nobody can definitively prove you wrong. It's participatory entertainment that's lasted 50 years. Let's talk about what happened to the Teamsters after Hoffa vanished, because this is actually a fascinating piece of the story that often gets overlooked. Remember, the union was the entire reason Hoffa was killed. Control of the Teamsters meant control of billions of dollars and enormous political power. After Hoffa's disappearance, Frank Fitzsimmons remained president and continued to be cooperative with mob interests. The pension fund continued to be raided, sweetheart contracts continued to be signed, and corruption remained rampant. But things were changing. The FBI was paying attention now. RICO laws were being developed specifically to target mob influence in unions. The pressure was building. In the 1980s, the federal government brought massive RICO cases against the Teamsters leadership, arguing the entire union had been infiltrated and controlled by organized crime. In 1989, a consent decree was signed placing the Teamsters under federal oversight. For the first time in decades, union elections were monitored by the government to prevent mob interference. It was an admission that Hoffa and Fitzsimmons had been right about one thing. The mob did control the Teamsters. The oversight lasted until 2020. Yes, 2020, when the union was finally deemed clean enough to govern itself again. That's over 30 years of federal supervision. Think about what that means. Hoffa's murder and the corruption he enabled had consequences that lasted generations. Interestingly, when Hoffa's son James P. became president in 1999, it was seen as both redemption and continuation of his father's legacy. But James P. was different. He worked within the reform structure, emphasized transparency, and largely avoided the mob connections that had defined his father's tenure. The Teamsters under James P. Hoffa were powerful but clean, or at least cleaner. It was like the family was trying to reclaim the good parts of Jimmy's legacy while leaving the dark stuff behind. Here's something most people don't know. Jimmy Hoffa wasn't declared legally dead until 1982, 7 years after he disappeared. His wife, Josephine, had to petition the court to have him declared dead so she could settle his estate and receive his pension benefits. Can you imagine having to go to court to prove your husband is dead when there's no body, no proof, just absence? The court heard testimony from investigators, reviewed evidence of the circumstances of his disappearance, and ultimately ruled that yes, Jimmy Hoffa was deceased. It was a formality, but an important one. It allowed his family to move forward legally, if not emotionally. But here's the weird part. Legally declaring someone dead doesn't close the criminal investigation. Hoffa's murder remains an open case with the FBI. If someone confessed tomorrow or if his body was found, it could still be prosecuted as a homicide. There's no statute of limitations on murder. So in a strange legal limbo, Hoffa is simultaneously officially dead and the subject of an active murder investigation. He's Schrodinger's Teamster, both gone and still here. Let's do a fun thought experiment. If Jimmy Hoffa could see the Teamsters today, what would he think? The union is smaller now, about 1.3 million members compared to the 1.5 million at Hoffa's peak. But it's also cleaner, more transparent, and more focused on actual labor advocacy rather than mob connections and corruption. The pension fund is properly managed. Elections are fair. Federal oversight has ended. Would Hoffa be proud? Or would he think the union has lost its edge, its power, its willingness to do whatever it takes to win? It's hard to say. The man was a complicated tangle of genuine labor advocacy and criminal compromise. He fought for workers' rights while enabling organized crime. He built power through both legitimate organizing and illegitimate intimidation. The modern Teamsters represent a path Hoffa could never have taken. Clean, legal, transparent. But they also represent everything he fought for: better wages, better conditions, dignity for working people. In a way, maybe his legacy is split between the good he accomplished and the bad methods he used. The union got to keep the good parts and discard the mob connections. That's probably the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. The FBI's eternal hunt. Why they can't quit Hoffa. Let's talk about the FBI's obsession with this case, because make no mistake, it is an obsession. They've spent millions of dollars, thousands of man-hours, and incalculable resources chasing leads about Hoffa's disappearance. Why? Why not just accept it's unsolvable and move on? Reason 1, it's personal for the Bureau. The Hoffa case represents a failure, and the FBI doesn't like failures. This was a high-profile murder of a nationally known figure that happened in broad daylight, and they couldn't solve it. That stings. It's embarrassing. Every year that passes without a resolution is another year that critics can point to the case as evidence that the FBI isn't as effective as it claims to be. Solving it would be vindication. Reason 2, it's about the mob. Finding Hoffa and prosecuting his killers isn't just about one case. It's symbolic. It would prove that organized crime can't get away with murder, even decades later. It would send a message that the long arm of the law will eventually catch up to you. In an era where traditional mob power has declined, solving Hoffa's murder would be a final victory lap, a closing of the books on that era of organized crime. Reason 3, new technology keeps giving hope. Every few years, some new forensic technology emerges that makes investigators think, maybe this is what we need to finally crack the case. Ground-penetrating radar, advanced DNA analysis, improved cadaver dog training, satellite imagery analysis. Each advancement brings renewed hope that maybe, this time they'll find something. It keeps the case perpetually active because there's always one more thing to try. Reason 4. Someone might still talk. There are still people alive who know something. Maybe not the actual killers. They're mostly dead. But associates, family members, people who heard stories or saw things. As these people age and face their own mortality, there's always a chance someone will decide to come clean. Deathbed confessions happen. Guilty consciences eat at people. The FBI keeps the case open partly because they're hoping someone will finally break the silence. Let's have some fun and look at how Hoffa's disappearance has been referenced across pop culture, because it's everywhere once you start noticing. All the bullet point content, but rephrase it to sound conversational instead of reading a list. Instead of, in television, The Simpsons has referenced Hoffa. Say it like, The Simpsons has referenced Hoffa multiple times, including a scene where Bart is buried next to Hoffa. Family Guy made jokes about finding Hoffa in various ridiculous locations. Futurama had a gag where Hoffa's body is found in the year 3000. Pretty much every crime show, Law and Order, CSI, Criminal Minds, has done a Hoffa-inspired episode. Same within music. Just remove that header and flow directly into Billy Joel reference Hoffa. And in comedy, remove the header, keep the content. Here's a question nobody wants to ask, but maybe we should. Is it time to stop actively searching for Jimmy Hoffa? Hear me out. It's been 50 years. Millions of dollars have been spent on searches that have all come up empty. Every major suspect is dead. The mob families that ordered the hit are largely defunct. The chances of finding remains at this point are microscopically small. Is it ethical to keep spending public resources on this case when there are unsolved murders of people who are less morally compromised than Hoffa? When there are active cases that might actually be solvable? I'm not saying close the case entirely. Keep it open. Follow credible leads if they emerge, but maybe stop excavating random properties based on questionable informant tips. Maybe accept that some mysteries don't get solved, and that's okay. Maybe let Hoffa's family have some peace without constant reminders that we still haven't found him. On the other hand, there's something to be said for persistence, for the principle that murder investigations don't expire, for the idea that even if the victim was himself a criminal, justice still matters, for the possibility, however slim, that we might still find him. It's a tough call, and honestly, I don't know what the right answer is. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Jimmy Hoffa's influence wasn't just domestic. The Teamsters had international connections, and Hoffa himself had relationships with labor leaders and criminal organizations around the world. Some investigators have theorized that his disappearance might have had international dimensions that we've never fully explored. During the 1960s, Hoffa developed relationships with labor unions in Europe, Central America, and even parts of Asia. The Teamsters Pension Fund invested in international projects, including hotels and casinos in the Caribbean. These connections meant Hoffa had knowledge of operations that crossed borders, involved foreign governments, and touched on Cold War politics. There's a fringe theory that Hoffa's murder was actually orchestrated by international criminal syndicates rather than just domestic mob families. The argument goes that Hoffa knew too much about money laundering operations that moved cash between the U.S., Caribbean tax havens, and European banks. These weren't just mob operations. They potentially involved corrupt politicians, intelligence agencies, and multinational corporations. Is there hard evidence for this? No, but it adds another layer of complexity to an already labyrinthine case. If Hoffa's murder involved international players, it would explain why the cover-up has been so thorough and why American law enforcement has hit so many dead ends. You can't solve a case if half the conspirators are in other countries under different jurisdictions. Here's a disturbing thought. There are probably people in witness protection right now who know exactly what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Former mob associates who flipped, who made deals with prosecutors, who are living under assumed names in quiet suburban neighborhoods. They know where the body is. They know who did it. They know every detail. But they're not talking. Why? Because their deals might not have included immunity for the Hoffa murder specifically. Or because talking about Hoffa would implicate them directly in his death. Or because even in witness protection, they're still terrified of mob retribution. Not against them necessarily, but against family members who didn't get relocated. The mob's memory is long, and revenge can wait decades. The FBI has interviewed countless protected witnesses over the years, trying to extract information about Hoffa. Some have provided tips that led to searches. But nobody has given up the location, the definitive answer. Either they don't actually know, or they're taken to their graves. It's entirely possible that the solution to this mystery is living in a ranch house in Arizona, watching game shows, and will die of old age without ever telling a soul where Jimmy Hoffa's body ended up. That's infuriating, but it's also probably true. We love to think that modern forensic science can solve anything. We watch CSI and think, just run the DNA, check the satellite footage, use the supercomputer. But the Hoffa case is a perfect example of the limitations of forensics. First, there's a time problem. Forensic evidence degrades. After 50 years, DNA is damaged or destroyed. Chemical traces dissipate. Physical evidence gets contaminated by environmental factors. Even if investigators are searching the right location, they might not find anything because nature has erased it. Second, there's a location problem. All the fancy forensic technology in the world doesn't help if you're searching the wrong place. Ground-penetrating radar only works if you're scanning the area where the body actually is. Cadaver dogs are amazing, but they can't search the entire state of Michigan. Without credible information about where to look, forensics is just expensive guesswork. Third, there's a disposal problem. If Hoffa was incinerated, ground up, dissolved in acid, or otherwise completely destroyed, there's nothing for forensics to find. You can't extract DNA from ashes that were scattered 50 years ago. You can't analyze remains that don't exist. The mob might have simply done too thorough a job. The Hoffa case is a humbling reminder that science has limits. It's a tool, not magic. And sometimes, the bad guys are just smarter, more thorough, and luckier than we want to admit. Here's something dark. Jimmy Hoffa's successful disappearance became a template for organized crime. After 1975, when the mob saw how effectively they'd erased Hoffa and how little trouble it caused them, the methodology became more common. Other targets were disappeared in similar ways. Killed, body disposed of thoroughly, no trace left behind. Investigators have noted an uptick in Hoffa-style disappearances in the late 1970s and early 1980s. People connected to organized crime who became problems would simply vanish. No bodies, no crime scenes, no witnesses. Just gone. The Hoffa case proved it could be done, and done well. This is part of why solving the Hoffa case matters beyond just Hoffa himself. If investigators could crack this methodology, understand exactly how it was done, they might be able to solve dozens of other disappearances. The techniques used to hide Hoffa, whatever they were probably reused multiple times. Finding him could be the key to finding others. But 50 years later, the copycat disappearances remain just as unsolved as the original. The mob learned their lesson well, and they've kept their secrets even as the organization crumbled around them. The alternative theory: what if IT wasn't the mob? Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a minute. What if everyone's been wrong this whole time? What if the mob didn't kill Jimmy Hoffa? I know, all the evidence points to organized crime. The circumstances, the suspects, the motive, everything. But humor me for a second. What are the alternative possibilities? Possibility 1, corporate assassination. Hoffa had made powerful corporate enemies during his years of aggressive union organizing. Trucking companies, shipping corporations, manufacturers, all had reasons to hate him. What if one of these companies, or a coalition of them, decided to eliminate the problem? Hire professional killers who weren't connected to the mob, make it look like a mob hit, and let law enforcement chase the wrong suspect for decades? It's far-fetched, but not impossible. Corporate America in the 1970s was ruthless, and union busting sometimes turned violent. If you could remove the most effective union leader in the country and blame it on the Mafia, that's a pretty good deal. Possibility 2, rogue Teamsters. What if Hoffa was killed by Teamsters officials who didn't want him back in power, but who weren't acting on mob orders? Independent actors within the union who saw Hoffa's potential return as a threat to their positions and decided to handle it themselves? This theory has problems. Mainly that those same officials probably had mob connections anyway, but it's technically possible. Not every crime committed by people in the mob's orbit is actually mob-sanctioned. Possibility 3. IT really was just a random crime. The most unlikely theory of all. What if Hoffa's disappearance had nothing to do with his union activities or mob connections? What if he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, became the victim of a random crime? Carjacking gone wrong, robbery, something completely unrelated is past, and the timing was just coincidental. This theory has virtually no support because the circumstances are too suspicious. But statistically, random crime exists. It's just that when a high-profile mob-connected figure disappears under mysterious circumstances, random crime is pretty much the last thing anyone considers. I don't actually believe any of these alternative theories. The mob did it. But it's worth remembering that confirmation bias is real, and sometimes investigators get tunnel vision on the obvious suspect and miss other possibilities. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance had lasting effects on American labor politics that we're still seeing today. His murder and the corruption it exposed became ammunition for anti-union forces. Politicians who wanted to weaken organized labor could point to Hoffa and say, "See? This is what unions become. Corrupt, criminal, dangerous." The Teamsters specifically became a political liability for the broader labor movement. Other unions distanced themselves, afraid that association with the Teamsters would taint them by proxy. Union membership in America peaked in the 1950s at around 35% of the workforce and has been declining ever since. While Hoffa's disappearance wasn't the only cause of that decline, it certainly didn't help. Ronald Reagan's breaking of the air traffic controllers' strike in 1981, the decline of manufacturing jobs, the rise of right-to-work laws, the weakening of collective bargaining protections, all of these were part of a larger political shift against organized labor. And the specter of Jimmy Hoffa, corrupt, mobbed up, ultimately murdered by his own criminal associates, hung over all of it. Hoffa had fought for workers' rights, and in many ways he won major victories. But his methods, his compromises, his willingness to work with criminals, all of that undermined the moral authority of the labor movement. His disappearance became symbolic of everything that was wrong with unions, even though the things he fought for, living wages, safe working conditions, dignity for working people, were fundamentally right. It's a tragedy, really. His legitimate accomplishments got overshadowed by his criminal associations, and his murder became a cautionary tale about the dangers of organized labor rather than a story about corporate and criminal violence against a labor leader. Here's the real talk. Does solving a Hoffa case actually matter at this point? Everyone involved is dead. The Teamsters have been reformed. The mob families that ordered the hit are defunct or decimated. Finding Hoffa's body won't bring him back, won't punish his killers, they're already dead, won't change history, won't reform labor politics, won't do anything except give us an answer. And maybe that's enough? Maybe knowing is valuable for its own sake? Maybe closure matters, even when it doesn't change anything practical? Or maybe we're just obsessed with mystery, because humans hate unsolved puzzles, and we've built this case up into something bigger than it deserves to be. Maybe Jimmy Hoffa was just a criminal who got killed by other criminals, and we should let it go. I don't have an answer to this, but I think it's worth asking the question, why do we care so much? What are we really looking for when we search for Jimmy Hoffa? Are we looking for him? Or for something else? Justice, closure, proof that mysteries can be solved, evidence that the past can be understood? The final theories, the wildest stuff we haven't covered yet. Before we wrap up, let me hit you with some of the absolutely wildest theories that I couldn't fit anywhere else. The medical specimen theory. Some people believe Hoffa's body was donated to a medical school under a false name and was used for anatomy classes or research. After being dissected and studied, the remains would have been cremated with other medical waste. It's dark. It's plausible from a disposal standpoint, and it would explain why no body has ever been found. The industrial accident cover-up theory. This one suggests Hoffa wasn't murdered at all. He died in an accident at a mob-connected industrial facility, and it covered it up to avoid investigation. Maybe he fell into machinery. Maybe there was an explosion. Who knows? The mob disposed of the evidence to prevent authorities from discovering what operations were happening at that location. The buried at SEA theory. not the Great Lakes, but actual ocean burial. Some theorists believe Hoffa's body was driven to the Atlantic coast and dumped far offshore, weighted down to stay on the ocean floor forever. It would require a longer drive and more logistics, but it would be virtually foolproof. The divided remains theory. This theory suggests Hoffa's body was dismembered and buried in multiple locations across several states. A leg in Michigan, torso in New Jersey, head in Pennsylvania, etc. This would make finding him nearly impossible because you'd have to locate multiple burial sites. It's gruesomely thorough. None of these theories have any real evidence, but they're out there bouncing around in the true crime community. People have been speculating for 50 years, and at this point, every remotely possible scenario has been suggested. 50 years later, here's what we know for sure. Jimmy Hoffa was killed on July 30th, 1975, almost certainly by mob associates acting on orders from organized crime leadership. His body was disposed of so thoroughly that despite millions of dollars in searches, thousands of investigative hours, and 5 decades of effort, we still haven't found it. The people who killed him are dead. The people who ordered his death are dead. The organizations that benefited from his murder are largely defunct. And yet we keep searching, keep theorizing, keep hoping that maybe, somehow, we'll finally get the answer. Maybe we will. Maybe tomorrow someone will find a steel drum in a lake, or ground-penetrating radar will finally detect something at that New Jersey landfill, or a 100-year-old mob associate will have a deathbed confession. Maybe the mystery gets solved. Or maybe Jimmy Hoffa stays lost forever. Maybe this is one puzzle that never gets completed. Maybe some questions don't have answers, and we just have to live with that uncertainty. Either way, the search for Jimmy Hoffa has become about more than just finding a body. It's become a test of whether justice can transcend time, whether mysteries can be solved through persistence, whether the past can ever truly be understood. It's become a symbol of everything unresolved in American history. The mob era, labor struggles, political corruption, the limits of law enforcement, the cost of ambition. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared 50 years ago, but his absence is louder than most people's presence. He's more famous dead and missing than he ever was alive. His story has become American mythology, a modern legend that we tell and retell, searching for meaning in the mystery. And maybe that's his real legacy. Not the union contract he negotiated or the mob connections he maintained, but the question he left behind. In a world where everything is documented, tracked, and recorded, how do you simply disappear? Jimmy Hoffa found out. He became the answer to his own question. If you made it this far, congratulations. You now know more about Jimmy Hoffa than most FBI agents. You've journeyed through 50 years of conspiracy theories, mob hits, federal investigations, and enough wild speculation to fill a dozen documentaries. So, what do you think happened? Drop a comment below with your theory. Are you Team Giant Stadium? Team Incinerator? Team, he's literally in my backyard and I just haven't checked? Do you think we'll ever find him, or is Jimmy Hoffa destined to remain America's most famous missing person forever? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's greatest mysteries, smash that like button. Subscribe for more true crime content, and hit the notification bell, so you don't miss when we cover other unsolved cases that have haunted investigators for decades. Share this video with your true crime-obsessed friends, your conspiracy theorist uncle, your history teacher who's weirdly into mob stories. Whoever needs to know about the man who disappeared so thoroughly that we've been digging up entire stadiums looking for him. And hey, if you know where Jimmy Hoffa is buried, maybe drop a tip to the FBI. There might be a reward in it for you. Or at least some really good karma. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, if you're ever planning to disappear, take notes from Jimmy Hoffa. The man has been missing for 50 years, and we still can't find him. That's either the world's best hide-and-seek strategy or the world's most effective murder cover-up. I'll let you decide which.